I'm interested in your roots. When were you first exposed to music in your memory? When did that exposure blossom into a passion? And how was that passion forwarded in taking up the flute as an instrument?
That's a really good question. I can say that I was lucky enough to be exposed to all kinds of music from a very, very young age. I primarily grew up listening to the music that my dad listened to when he
Mhm.
was, a teenager in Europe, and also lots of progressive rock. So,
Hmm.
grew up like a Rush fan of classic rock, fan of, Focus, like those prog like Dutch bands, stuff like that. ABBA, all of that. Um, but I also, because I come from a family of classical music appreciators, I was exposed to some classical music as well. And I distinctly remember that um, when I was in preschool, and this is something that gets introduced to a lot of very small children, I recall that they brought out a recording of Peter and the Wolf by Prokofiev with the narration. It might have been David Bowie's narration, but there's many versions. It felt like something from another planet. You know what I mean? This music was so sort of emotionally complex, harmonically complex in a way that I hadn't ever heard before. And I remember we at home we got it on just an audio version on like VHS.
Hmm.
And I remember like putting it in and just replaying it over and over and over.
And
I felt very
how'd that
strong.
lead to the flute?
Yeah, so I existed like that. I played piano when I was in the second grade, and
Hmm.
then when I got to fourth grade, that's when in the public schools they come around with the instruments and they say, "Do you want to join band? Do you want to join orchestra?"
Hmm.
And truly, the only real reason that I picked flute at that time was because my mother played it, and we had an old flute in the house, and so I had access to that, so I was already tinkering with it. So I showed up and I was like, I can already sort of make a sound on this, and they were like, "Great, do you want to do that one?" I was like, "Sure, yeah." But and you know what? To this day, I'm so glad that I picked it because I really do think. I mean, I'm biased, but I really do think it's the coolest instrument. I think it has so much range and what it can do, and yeah, I just sort of like never put it down. And what happens when you never put it down is you end up doing it as an adult. So that's how that happened.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. So your recitation is part of the Dame Mira Hess recital series, which is broadcast on Chicago's classical station WFMT. Using Dame Hess, who lived from 1890 to 1965, as an example, what do the symphony performers of today learn from their 20th century peers during what arguably was a time in which symphonies made more of an impact on history?
What I do know is that she was facilitating concerts during the Second World War, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken.
Correct.
So a time of obviously much difficulty, loss, and strife. Um, and I think that that is, as cliche as it might sound, that is continually the universal truth and the universal motivation, hopefully, that symphonies are continuing to perpetuate.
Hmm.
Um, I think that if you're in it for the right reasons, if you're not in it for fame or prestige or anything like that, um, the main motivation is always coming from a place of here's something that I love to do just by myself. Maybe it will improve someone else's life if I am to share it.
Okay.
I never like it when people say that orchestras are dying and it's a dying art form and it's not worth doing, because I think there's nothing quite like going to a live performance, and there are still many avenues that orchestras like can take, that they are taking,
Great.
that are continuing to impact people today.
In your experience, what is the tipping point of discipline? In our modern sensibility, it's so easy to be distracted. So, how did you cross that barrier from easy distraction in a generation that was in the midst of it to the discipline it took to be your best and achieve your success?
That's another really excellent question, because I don't think I am immune to the
Sure.
easy distraction of today's world. I'm certainly not. However, it really sort of is a matter of setting your priorities straight. Um, if you truly want to do this, if you truly want to practice and get to the level that would make you a professional, that'll land you gigs, that will land you jobs.
Mhm.
If you truly want to do it, you will do it. Um,
Mhm.
so I also can credit I owe very much to my teachers, both those I had very early on and those I had through my um, time in university and at the conservatory I went to. Uh, I I owe them so much, because they instilled in me a framework of discipline that did not feel like torture,
Mm.
an environment in which new information did not feel like a threat, but instead an invitation to explore and improve. So I went to Carnegie Mellon University for my undergraduate degree, and I studied with a wonderful flute teacher, Alberto Almarza, and he's just about the wisest person I know. And at some point, I was in a private lesson with him, and I was playing some orchestral excerpt, and he was getting real picky about details, and he was telling me, you got to do this, and I started getting frustrated with myself, because I felt like I understood what he was telling me, but it wasn't coming out the way I wanted. So I started getting he could tell that under the surface I was getting frustrated with myself. And he said, if we could snap our fingers and be perfect right now, if we could just be perfect at playing anything, it would be the greatest disaster ever, because it would entirely lose meaning, anything that we're doing. And
Interesting.
then he said, the goal is that you have to aim for perfection, with the understanding that it's actually unattainable. And so it's very, again, there's this sort of cliche saying, it's like shoot for the moon and you'll end up in the stars. It's like you're never going to make the moon, it's not possible. But in the process of doing so, you will become excellent. And as soon as I framed discipline with that mentality, it became less about perfection. It became less about never, ever, ever being distracted, and more about just learning to gently reroute myself into work that would be good for me that day.
Your program for July 30th, I assume, was self curated, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. What do these choices say about your personality and approach to your craft?
Sort of telling that I really did just pick all of my favorite stuff. because
Well,
it because when you're in school, and I think this is a very good framework for like a graduate recital program. When you're in school, there are guidelines for what you have to program. So they say you have to program a piece from this era, and you have to program a piece from this era, and one chamber work. And I think for the purposes of education, and also like learning how to build a varied program, that's an absolutely valid approach.
mhm.
However, Um, I did try to keep a sense of variety and intrigue. Like you have to keep in mind that the audience, if you play exactly the same kind of stuff for an entire program, the audience is just going to be like, okay, it's just more of the same.
Right.
But I did, because I was given this sort of newfound freedom in choosing stuff, I did really go with what makes me feel the deepest, some of my most deep feeling pieces. So included on this program, it's I'll just for a quick rundown. It's a piece for flute and piano. All of it is flute and piano.
Hmm.
I should clarify. First piece is by Samuel Barber. It's a very short piece called Canzone, and it's very lyrical. It dwells a lot in the lowest register of the flute, which is just an incredibly luscious, indulgent register, I believe. So, and then the second piece I'm doing is a very new work by a very good friend of mine that I commissioned a couple years ago. His name is Colby Clevin, the composer, and he's a horn player, getting his graduate degree at Juilliard currently. And it was written for me, which makes it
Wow.
really special. He has a really clear idea of what I like to play and sort of the music taste that the two of us share. So it's really kind of the whole thing is just this letter of friendship between us.
Uh,
Yeah, and then I'm doing uh, three romances by Robert Schumann, which is originally for oboe or violin. But of course, I love stealing repertoire. Uh, so I'm just stealing that one. But a lot of flute players play it. But that's another really lyrical, deep feeling, sort of stormy. It's storm clouds and then the sun comes out. It's such a wide variety of emotions. And then finishing off, I'm doing an arrangement of a very dramatic opera aria from Eugene Onegin. It's by Tchaikovsky. I've just always been drawn to a great iconic melody, a great melodramatic moment, a beautiful, luscious lyrical line. I like to be dramatic, but but I'm like super excited to present this program, and it was a really cool opportunity to curate it myself because
right.
I can just show people what I best like to do.
You are also a high level painter and artist, which requires the intensity of discipline found in the music craft. But how does your craft in musicianship inform your brushstrokes on a canvas? And what do those works reveal about who you are?
It's interesting that you say that painting and drawing requires the same level of discipline because to a certain extent I agree,
Hmm.
but because I never went to school,
Right.
when I am doing a project just without a deadline
Hmm.
of my own idea, it does not feel disciplined in the same way that music feels disciplined
Right.
because drawing and painting, it's much more like the world around me kind of falls away and I'm able to impose my own rules in real time of how I want it to look.
Hmm.
There's a little bit more just experimentation. More often than not, what I will do is after I have the most basic of outlines,
Hmm.
I pretty much just start in the middle and complete every level of detail per millimeter
Hmm.
until it's completely done,
Hmm.
which does not to me actually feel very disciplined. It almost just feels like
I should
I am
use I should have used the word concentration.
concentration, absolutely. And so sometimes I'll be painting and or drawing and I'll think like, I kind of want it to look like how this thing sounds. And it's like, okay, like how do I
Hmm.
feel if
Hmm.
I finagle it to mimic that? The two very much feel like one thing a lot of
Yeah.
the time.
Your final question. I know your mother is also a flutist and recently picked up the instrument again to perform. What piece of music performance do you think would be defining of your relationship if you were to do a duet?
There's this very famous flute duet
Hmm.
that is kind of like a double concerto because it's done either with piano, two flutes and piano, or two flutes and like full orchestra.
Hmm.
Um, and it's by a composer by the name of Doppler. It's not as though there's a first flute part that takes
Hmm.
the melody and then a second part that only supports that line. It's very much like a tandem bicycle.
Okay.
And that feels appropriate because when I was very first starting on the flute, my
Hmm.
mom was my first teacher.
Hmm.
And now I am effectively her teacher. Now I'm the one that she goes to
Right.
because she took up the flute over COVID. So, it's been a few years. But before that, she hadn't really picked it up for like 30 years.
Yeah.
So she had a lot of like fundamental skills from before, but she was basically starting from the ground up. And so we had this role reversal.
Huh.
And now that we've both, you know, albeit in different ways, me as a professional and her as a serious um, amateur hobbyist,
Right.
even though we come to find flute playing in different ways, I think the tandem bike approach to playing a duet fits the fact that we have now both taught one another.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2025.